Above the clouds, where the air is too thin for human lungs to breathe, stands a massive pyramid of rock and ice. For thousands of years, this giant mountain remained hidden from the modern world, knowing only to the local people who worshipped it as a god. Today we know it as Mount Everest, the highest point on earth, but beneath its beautiful snow-covered peaks lies a dark, mysterious history. It is a place that has attracted thousands of pupils, all risking their lives to stand on its top. Many never returned. To truly understand why people are drawn to this dangerous giant, we must travel back to millions of years, long before human beings ever walked the earth, to a time when this great mountain was actually at the bottom of the sea. Long ago, our planet looked very different. The landmass that we know called India was not attached to Asia. Instead, it was a massive island floating in the ancient ocean, slowly moving northward. Around 50 million years ago, this floating piece of land crashed into the massive continent of Asia. The collision was not quick. It happened at a speed of just a few centimeters every year. But the force of two giant pieces of the earth pushing against each other was unimaginable. The land between them had nowhere to go but up. The ground buckled, twisted, and rose into the sky, creating the Himalayan mountain range. Even today, if you climb near the top of Mount Everest, you can find rocks containing the fossils of ancient sea creatures. These tiny shells are a permanent reminder that the highest mountain on earth was born from the deepest ocean. As the centuries passed, the mountain continued to grow, rising higher into the freezing sky. The people living in the valleys below looked up at these white peaks with deep respect and fear. The people named the highest mountain Chomolungma, Komolungma, which means the mother goddess of the world. Mother goddess of the world. To them, the mountain was a holy place, the home of gods and spirits. They believed that humans should not disturb the peace of these high slopes. On the southern generations, the local people lived in harmony with the mountain, grazing their animals in the green valleys and never thinking of climbing to the freezing top. The mountain was a sacred giant left untouched by human feet. Everything began to change in the 19th century when British map makers arrived in India. The British Empire wanted to map the entire Indian subcontinent, a massive project known as the Great Trigonometrical Survey. Great Trigonometrical Survey. Armed with heavy metal instruments called theodolites. Teams of surveyors walked across jungles, rivers, and plains, measuring distance and heights with incredible accuracy. For a long time, the mapmakers were not allowed to enter Nepal or Tibet, as both kingdoms kept their borders closed to foreigners. The British surveyors had to stand hundreds of kilometers away on the plains of India, peering through telescopes at the distant snow-covered peaks of the Himalayas. They began leveling the mysterious mountains with simple numbers. In the year 1847, a British surveyor named Andrew Walker noticed a distant peak behind all the others. He labeled it simply as Peak 15. For several years, when the medicians in Calcutta walked carefully with the numbers collected from the field, it was a slow and difficult task, done entirely by hand without any computers. Finally, in 1852, a brilliant Indian mathematician named Radhanath Sikdar rushed into the office of the Surveyor General. He had calculated the height of Peak 15 and discovered something wonderful. It was exactly 29,002 feet high. Peak 15 was officially the highest mountain in the world. A few years later, the British decided to rename the peak after Sir George Everest, the man who led the survey team for many years. And so, to the Western world, the mountain became Mount Everest. The news of the world's highest peak spread across Europe, sparking a deep sense of curiosity and adventure for early 20th century explorers. Reaching the North Pole and the South Pole had been the ultimate goals. Once those poles were reached, Mount Everest became known as the Third Pole. It was the last great frontier on Earth. British explorers felt a strong urge to conquer it. However, getting permission to visit the mountain was almost impossible. Nepal refused to let Westerners enter its territory. Finally, in 1921, the government of Tibet opened its border for the very first time, allowing a small British team to approach to Mount Everest from the northern side. This first expedition in 1920 was not made for climbing to the top. Its purpose was to explore the unknown valleys, draw maps, and find a possible route up to the mountain. The team was led by experienced explorers, including a young schoolteacher named George Mallory. It's Mallory, not Melody. Okay, Mallory was obsessed with the mountain, fascinated by its sheer size and beauty. When a reporter later asked him why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, Mallory famously replied with 4 simple words: "Because it is there." The 1921 team suffered greatly from the extreme cold and the thin air, but they successfully mapped a route that lay toward the higher ridges of the mountains. They proved that a path to the summit was possible. Encouraged by their findings, the British returned in 1922 with a much larger team. This time they brought something new and controversial: heavy metal cylinders filled with artificial oxygen. Many traditional climbers felt that using oxygen was ungentlemanly, believing that humans should test themselves against nature using only their own strength. But as the climbers moved higher, they realized that the human body simply could not survive without help. At 8,000 meters above sea level, the air contains only one-third of the oxygen found at the beach. This area is now known as the death zone, a place where the human body slowly begins to die from the lack of air. During the expedition, 7 local border assistants lost their lives in a massive avalanche, marking the first recorded deaths on the mountain. The team had to turn back, defeated by the brutal environment. The year 1924 brought the most famous and mysterious expedition in the history of Mount Everest. George Mallory returned for its third attempt, joined by a young athletic university student named Andrew Irvine. On the morning of June 8, 1924, 2 men left their high camp and began walking toward the summit. Another member of the team, Noel Odell, was looking up through a telescope when the clouds briefly parted. He saw 2 small black dots moving steadily up the rocky ridge high above the world. Then the thick mist rolled back in and swallowing the figures. Mallory and Irvine were never seen alive again. For decades, the world wondered if they had reached the top before they died, which would make them the first people to conquer Everest. Nearly 30 years before they officially accepted the loss of Mallory and Irvine cast a dark shadow over the mountain, and for years Everest remained quiet. Then the geopolitical landscape changed. In the late 1940s, Tibet closed its borders once again, but Nepal decided to open theirs to the outside world. This meant explorers had to find a completely new route from the southern side of the mountain. This new path was far more dangerous, forcing climbers to walk across the Khumbu icefall, a terrifying moving river of ice. The giant blocks of ice, some as large as the houses, could collapse at any moment without warning. Despite the dangers, teams from different nations belongs arriving in Nepal, all competing to be the first to reach the root of the world. By 1953, the British were under immense pressure to succeed. They organized a massive expedition led by a military officer named John Hunt. The team included the best climbers from Great Britain and New Zealand, along with a large group of local Sherpa people. The Sherpas were an ethnic group living in the high valleys of Nepal. Over generations, their bodies had adapted to the high altitude, making them incredibly strong and resilient in the thin air. Among them was Tenzing Norgay, a highly experienced Sherpa climber who had spent years working on different Everest expeditions. He joined a tall, white beekeeper from New Zealand named Edmund Hillary. Hillary and Tenzing Everest. On May 28, 1953, the two men set up a tiny tent at 27,900 feet, spending a freezing night high on the mountain. The next morning, May 29, they woke up to find the sky clear and the wind calm. They strapped on their heavy oxygen masks and began their final climb. Near the very top, they faced a giant vertical wall of rock. Hillary managed to wedge his body into a narrow crack between the rock and the ice, slowly pulling himself up. This difficult spot is now known as the Hillary Step. After clearing this final obstacle, they went up a gentle snow slope until there was nowhere higher to go. Okay, at 11:30 in the morning, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay stood on the highest point on earth. They had done what many thought was impossible. They did not stay long as their oxygen supply was running low. Hillary took a few photographs of Tenzing holding the flags of Great Britain, Nepal, India, and the United Nations. Tenzing made a smaller hole in the snow and poured some sweets as an offering to the gods of the mountain. Hillary buried a small crucifix. After just 15 minutes on the summit, they began their long and dangerous walk back down. When the news reached London on the morning of Queen Elizabeth II's coronations, the world celebrated this incredible human achievement. The successful climb of 1953 changed the history of Mount Everest forever. It was no longer a mysterious, unreachable peak. Explorers from other countries soon arrived to test themselves against the mountain. In 1960, a team of China claimed to have reached the summit from the difficult northern ridge in Tibet. 3 years later, in 1963, an American team successfully climbed the mountain, and two of its members did something even more daring. They climbed up an entirely new route on the west ridge and walked down the southern side, crossing the entire mountain for the first time. As the years went by, climbers looked for newer and harder challenges on Everest. They no longer just wanted to reach the top, they wanted to do it in ways that seemed impossible. In 1975, a Japanese climber named Junko Tabai became the first woman to stand on the summit of Mount Everest, proving that the mountain was not just a playground for men. Shortly after, in 1978, two European climbers, Reinhold Messner and Peter Hebler, decided to attempt something that doctors had warned would cause permanent brain damage. They attempted to climb Mount Everest without using any artificial oxygen at all. Many experts believe that a human being would collapse and die without extra oxygen at such a high altitude. But Messner and Hebler moved slowly and carefully, listening to their bodies. They crawled on their hands and knees when they were too tired to stand. Through sheer willpower, they reached the top and returned safely, proving that the human body could adapt to the most extreme environments on Earth. Then 2 years later, in 1980, Reinhold Messner returned to the mountain alone. He climbed the northern face of Everest during the monsoon season, entirely by himself, without oxygen or a team. It remains one of the greatest achievements in the human history. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mount Everest entered a new era, the era of commercial climbing. Experienced guides realized that wealthy people were willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to be guided to the top of the world. Companies began organizing commercial expeditions, turning the dangerous mountain into highly profitable business. These companies hired teams of Sherpas to carry heavy loads, set up comfortable tents, cook hot meals, and fix ropes all the way from the base camp to the very top. Then suddenly you did not need to be an elite explorer to climb Everest. You just needed to be rich and good physical shape. Then one day, the climate change is also rapidly reshaping the Mount Everest. Scientists studying the region have found that the glaciers surrounding the peak are melting at an alarming rate. Ice that took thousands of years to freeze is disappearing in just few decades. As the ice melts, it reveals long-lost secrets. The bodies of climbers who disappeared decades ago now emerge from the melting snow. This presents a difficult challenge for the local authorities, who must decide how to handle these frozen crabs high up on the mountain. The melting ice also makes the traditional routes far more unstable and dangerous. Rockfalls are becoming more frequent because the ice that once held the loose rocks together is turning into water. The famous Hillary Dam, the vertical rock wall near the summit, was reported to have collapsed following the 2015 earthquake, changing the physical shape of the final climb forever. The mountain is changing before our very eyes, becoming less predictable with each passing year. Despite the pollution, the crowds, the melting ice, and the immense danger, the magic of Mount Everest remains as strong as ever. Every spring, adventurers from every corner of the globe leave their comfort. Every morning, every spring, adventurers from every corner of the globe leave their comfortable homes to spend months living in a cold, windy tent at base camp. At base camp, they know the statistics, they know the mountain takes lives every single year, yet they desire to stand on top of the world, something that words cannot explain. For the modern climber, Everest is the ultimate test of human endurance, mental strength, and spiritual limits. It is a place where humans can step outside their normal lives and face the raw, unwielding power of nature. When you stand on that small snow peak, looking down at the curved horizon of the earth, the entire world seems to vanish below you. For a few brief moments, you are standing at the closest point to the outer space that a human can reach on foot. And this is the story of Mount Everest. It is not just a story of rock and ice, it is a story of human ambition, courage, tragedy, and survival. It is the story of ancient sea creatures rising to touch the sky, of local people who saw gods in the white peaks, and the explorers who refused to accept that anything on earth was beyond their reach. As long as that great pyramid of rock stands tall in the freezing blue sky, people will continue to look up at it with a deep sense of wonder, drawn to its dangerous slopes, always searching